Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I am super excited to chat with all of you about the new Lisa Eldridge eyeshadow palettes. So I picked up one of her new palettes in the color story Myth. That's the purpley mauvey color story. And so for today's video, I'll share with you all my initial impressions about this palette, demo a look with all of the shades, do some comparison swatches with my other eyeshadow palettes, and also just talk through the other colorways that this palette came out with. I was especially interested in the Sorcery palette, and even though I didn't pick that up, I did manage to find some dupes in my existing collection, so I'll walk you guys through that. So if you're interested in learning more about the Lisa Eldridge eyeshadow palettes, then just stick around. So let's just start by talking about my initial thoughts when I saw this launch. So I feel like there wasn't really a lot of build-up for this launch. Basically, Lisa Eldridge dropped her video going through all the palettes, demoing all of them, and then shortly afterward we saw the palettes go on sale. If you guys have been watching my channel for a while, you know that I absolutely love her foundation and her lip products. I have a ton of her different lip formulas in my collection, and I didn't pick up her liquid eyeshadow or liquid blush simply because I just don't really like liquid makeup products that much, but I'm super excited that she came out with these eyeshadow palettes because eyeshadow is by far my favorite part of makeup, and so I was super excited to try out her formulas. And in terms of the packaging, Lisa Eldridge never disappoints. Honestly, the moment I saw this packaging, I knew I had to buy at least one of these eyeshadow palettes because I figured packaging alone was enough to justify the cost. The back of the package has all of the shade names along with holes that allow you to pop out the shadows. So if you want to mix and match the shadows, she also sells each of them individually so you can curate your own custom palette. Here we have the inside of the beautiful palette. The compact is honestly a little bit smaller than what I anticipated based on the promo pics, but I think this is the perfect size to just hold in your hand, to use for any touch-ups, or to carry in your purse if you like to do eyeshadow on the go. So now let's go into some swatches. So first off, we have the shade Nocturna, which is in her Velvet Matte formula. So this is a deep charcoal shade. And then we have the shade Illusionism, and this is a top coat shade. So you'll see this really has basically no pigmentation to it. Instead, it just adds a little veil of shimmer. So I'll give you guys a close-up shortly, but this basically has some fine pink reflect sparkles in it. Then we have the shade Mauve Decade, and this is also one of her Velvet formulas. And so I have actually tried this formula before. I used this palette yesterday the moment it got in from the mail because I just really had to try the formula. And one thing you'll see when I do the demo later on is that these velvet formulas are very buildable. So they're relatively sheer if you just put a light layer on, but it's really good for makeup beginners because you have a lot of control. Next up, we have Faded Amethyst. This is the one metallic shade in this palette, and it is extremely creamy and pigmented, as you can see. Then we have Victorian Trim. This is also a velvet shade. This is more of a bright magenta shade. And then we have Violet Stone, which is also a velvet. So one thing I'll mention about this palette is that it is very matte heavy. So 4 of the 6 shades are mattes, and so that does limit to some extent the looks you can do if you're someone who typically likes to have a shimmer all over the lid. This is basically the only pigmented shimmer option you have. So in general, this palette is a little bit more suited to someone who likes a lot of versatility in terms of matte shadows. So here we have a close-up of the swatches. And one thing I'll mention that's quite unique about her formula is there's absolutely no kick-up or fallout. As you can see, all of the swatches are super smooth and creamy. You don't have any feathering whatsoever. And in general, one thing that struck me when I was using her shadows yesterday is that they're very similar to Natasha Denona's formulas. So if you're a fan of Natasha Denona's cream to powder formula, then you'll really like the Velvet Matte formula from Lisa Eldridge. It is extremely similar. So it's that kind of formula that applies in sheer buildable layers, doesn't have any fallout, doesn't have any kick up in the pan. Now, Natasha's formula has been kind of controversial over the years. Some people really love it, some people really hate it. I personally enjoy it in its current incarnation, and I would say that these shadows are very similar to the current version of Natasha Denona's cream to powder. The metallic is quite similar as well to Natasha Denona in terms of having that very creamy element to it. It definitely applies best with a finger. And then this lid topper is a lot more subdued than the ones you get from Pat McGrath or Natasha Denona. So that is one major difference. This is by far the most lightweight, very, very subtle sparkle lid topper that I've tried. And with all of these formulas, I would highly recommend using either a finger or using natural hair brushes. These are the types of formulas where if you don't have a brush that can really pick up pigment very well, it's not necessarily going to translate as much on the lids. So as you'll see in the demo later, when it comes to these matte shades, I do need to build them up even with my natural hair brushes. And then with the shimmers, using a finger is definitely the best way to go. So with the palette overview out of the way, let's get into today's makeup look. So to start out, I only have some concealer and brow product on my face right now, so I thought I would pull out some of my other Lisa Eldridge products just to make this closer to like a full face of Lisa Eldridge. So I have here her foundation, which I have in shade 15. Let me actually show you guys the gorgeous bottle that this comes in. By far my favorite packaging for foundation. In general, Lisa Eldridge is an amazing brand if you're someone who really appreciates nice packaging. And if you guys watched my best of 2021 video, you know that I absolutely love this foundation. This was my top foundation last year. For me, I find this is really perfect for both a really flawless event kind of foundation look, but also for a more everyday natural look as well. As you can see, this foundation leaves a very natural finish on the skin. It's not very dewy, but it's also not very matte. And you can easily sheer this out or build it up, so that makes it quite versatile for a lot of different use cases. The shade 15 is a tiny bit warm for me at the moment, but overall, this is a really good shade match for me. So there we go. Here is the Lisa Eldridge foundation all over my face. And as you can see, I think this leaves just a very beautiful, perfected, but still very natural looking finish to the skin. Now for the lips, I'm going to go in with my Lisa Eldridge lipstick in the shade Spirited Away. This is in her luxuriously Lucent lip formula. This is a very beautiful berry rose shade with a hint of brown. So there is one light layer, and I'll just do another layer as well. There we go. Isn't that so pretty? So quick update on Lisa Eldridge's lip formula. So these were also some of my best of 2021 lip products. I absolutely love her luxuriously Lucent lip colors and also her lip gloss formula. It's one of my favorite everyday lip balm, lip mask sort of hybrid formulas. That said, one thing I will say is I have noticed that now that I've had these products for several months, closing in on a year, some of them are starting to turn. And Lisa Eldridge doesn't necessarily advertise herself as a clean beauty brand, but she does avoid certain types of ingredients. So that is one thing I wanted to mention, that I have noticed that for some of them, they have started to sort of taste or smell a little funky, which has been a little bit disappointing because I love them so much, but is probably due to the formulation not having as many preservatives. Also, these formulas don't have any fragrance in them, so once they start turning, you can really tell that they're turning. Also, I have had one bad experience with her luxuriously Lucent lip color in the color story Painterly. This is one of my favorite colors, but unfortunately when I got this pretty much right away, within a few weeks, it started to really irritate my lips. So I don't know if that's just like this one happened to be part of a bad batch, or if there's just something I'm particularly sensitive to, but it's never happened to me with any other lipstick. So I did just want to quickly mention that, because I have really featured these products heavily on my channel and I still really love them, but I have been a little bit disappointed in terms of how some of them have started to irritate my lips a bit. So if you have a lot of lip products from Lisa Eldridge, please let me know your experiences down below, because I'm not sure if it's just sort of a random chance thing that I happen to have a couple bad experiences, or if this is more a common issue with some of her formulations. Alright, so I went off camera and finished off the rest of my face, so we can focus now on the eyeshadow look. As always, all the products I have on my face will be linked down below. So to start out today's look, I'm going to go into this Mauve Decade shade and use this as my transition shade. So as you can see, this is a really beautiful, very subtle shade. You can definitely sort of dig your brush into the palette and still not have any issues with it being too harsh or coming across clumpy or patchy at all. It just glides on really beautifully. Now, if you have a deeper skin tone, I'm not sure how well this will show up on you, so I would be curious if any of you with deeper skin tones have tried this out. Please let me know in the comments down below how it's worked for you. But this does remind me a lot of, say, Valoria from Pat McGrath, so later on today we'll definitely have to do some comparison swatches. So I'm going to sweep this pretty generously all over the crease area. Next, with my Blender Pro from Sonia G, I'm going to go into this shade over here, which is Violet Stone. And I'm going to just put this on the outer portion. And as you can note, even though this shade looks really deep in pan, it actually applies in pretty sheer layers. So if you are someone with a fair skin tone, I wouldn't be afraid of the more pigmented shades in this palette. They are pretty easy to control because, as you can see, they just pack on pretty lightly. Now, if you are someone who is looking for more of a pigment punch right away, I don't know if you'll really like this formula that much, but I can definitely tell that Lisa Eldridge tried to make this a formula that works well for makeup beginners, because you really don't have to worry about going overboard. Or if you're just someone who likes more subtle eyeshadow looks, I think this formula is quite helpful for that as well. Now, just to spice things up a bit, I'm going into this magenta shade, which is Victorian Trim, and with my Crease Pro from Sonia G, I'm going to sweep this on the inner portion, just so we can see the difference between that and the other purple shade. As you can see, this is much more vibrant. If you want a more subtle purple look, I would say basically excluding this magenta shade will leave everything much more subtle. But if you want to kind of add more of a party to the look, then this shade will really deliver. And now with my Wayne Goss number 19, I'm going into this charcoal shade. And again, you can see that this definitely applies in very nice controlled layers. I think you could use this on a more defined brush as well to get more of a liner sort of effect. But as you can see, it also is very easy on a fluffy brush. So now I'm going to go in with a finger into this metallic shade and just sweep this all over the lid. Again, the one limitation I think this palette has is this is the only metallic shade, and so that's one major difference between this palette and other palettes, because as you can see, this metallic shade is quite deep. So if you're not really going for a very smoky look, then what you want to do is basically just use the mattes and then use some of this topper shade. But if you're looking for a look that does feature metallics, it's definitely going to go in this smoky direction. So now I'm just going to repeat some of what I did before with the matte shades, just to sort of amp them up a little bit more. So first I'm going to go back in with that black shade, then I'll go back into that purple shade, blending that a bit upwards and outwards. And then finally taking a bit of that magenta shade as well, just to make sure that everything blends in properly. And finally zhuzhing out the edges with a bit more of that mauvey shade. There we go. And now I'm going to finish off the lid by just going into this glitter topper shade. And I will say I'm a little bit on the fence in terms of how I feel about this shade. The most similar shades I have to this in my collection in terms of formula would be from my Suqqu palette. And if you guys watched that video review, you know that it's a little bit more of a subtle glitter topper than what I typically go for. As you can see, you kind of really have to go in and build up the layers if you want to have much impact. Now, if you're someone who doesn't normally like to have a lot of sparkle on your lids and you just want something that's like really cute, really pretty, then I think this definitely provides that. But if, like me, you are someone who likes a little bit more glitz and glam, then you might find yourself really building this up quite a lot and still not getting a ton of payoff. But that's not so much a quality thing. I think that's more of just a personal preference thing. And Lisa Eldridge doesn't necessarily go for as much high impact in terms of the shimmer. Now for the lower lash line, I'm going to basically repeat what I did on top and first go into this mauve shade and just kind of sweep this generously all over the lower lash line. Then I'm going to take some of that violet shade, concentrate that on the outer corners. Also deepen that up a bit with the black shade. And then I'll take a little bit of the magenta shade on the inner third and then just top that with the metallic shade on the inner 2/3. Now with my red for number 26, I'm going to take more of that glitter topper shade and just put that on the inner corners. So I went off camera to do my eyeliner, and here we have the final look. What do you guys think? So now zooming you guys out, let's go into some comparison swatches. So first off, the palette I immediately thought of with this Myth palette is this retro palette from Natasha Denona. Looking at them side to side though, I definitely think they're quite different. The Natasha Denona looks a lot peachier, whereas the Lisa Eldridge has much more violet to it. Just doing some side-by-side comparisons, let's first go into this mauve shade in Lisa Eldridge. And next to that, I'm gonna put Nude Mauve from the Retro palette. You can see that Nude Mauve has much more of kind of a peach tone to it. And then going into this deep shade in the Lisa Eldridge, let's swatch that next to Eau Part. Eau Part also has much more of that taupiness. And then if we go into this glitter topper shade from Lisa Eldridge, very, very fine shimmer. And so if we put Psychedelic next to that or Glitz, we can see that the Natasha Denona ones are much more high impact. And then if I swatch this fuchsia shade over here and then go into Rebellion from the Natasha Denona, it's much more red in undertone. Finally, let's go in with this shade over here and put Jude next to it from the Natasha Denona. And you can see Jude is a lot lighter and also has more of that peachy taupiness. So here are some close-ups. You can see there's really no shades that look that similar to each other. The next palette I thought of was Divine Rose 1 from Pat McGrath, but similarly, I would say the Lisa Eldridge has much more violet to it and less of the rosy undertones of Pat McGrath. So let's first take Valoria and swatch that over here. So Valoria has a little bit more depth in comparison to the shade in Lisa Eldridge, though these are quite similar, I would say, in overall tone. Then if we go into the Mahogany shade from Pat McGrath, it's definitely more red in undertone and much more pigmented than the shade in Lisa Eldridge. And then if we go into that lid topper shade in Pat McGrath, swatch that over here, you can see that it has a very different finish. This one has more of a very smooth, pearlescent finish, whereas the Lisa Eldridge has more glints of individual shimmers. Next, if I go into the cooler tone bronze shade in Pat McGrath, it also has a little bit more rosiness and is lighter than the shade in Lisa Eldridge. So again, on the whole, I would say there's not actually a lot of similarity between the Pat McGrath and the Lisa Eldridge. And just to compare formulations, I have here that Suqqu palette that I mentioned earlier. So this was the glitter topper shade I was talking about. And yeah, I do think this is a very, very similar formulation to what we have here from Lisa Eldridge. The Suqqu one actually has a little bit more shimmer in it. Sorry, it's on a part of my arm that maybe is hard for you guys to see. Let me actually swatch these two side by side just to make it easier to see. So this is the Suqqu and this is the Lisa Eldridge. So you can see that they're both quite sheer and very subtle, but the Suqqu, which is on top, actually has some more shimmer particles, whereas the Lisa Eldridge on the bottom has very scattered shimmers that are kind of like pinpoints of pink light. So with the comparisons for Myth out of the way, let's talk about Sorcery. So basically, I spent a lot of time on Lisa Eldridge's website trying to compare Myth and Sorcery and decide which of the two I wanted, since those were by far the color stories that most attracted me from this launch. And Sorcery is one of those palettes that just looks so beautiful, so unique. It really gives you that gorgeous peacock tail effect, and I haven't really seen curations like that before. And so I decided to go into my existing collection and try to put together a similar look, with basically the goal of just trying to assess for myself, would I really wear this look that often? Is this a color story that's worth picking up given the hefty price tag? And I would say the palette that's most similar in my collection to making this color story is actually the Holiday palette from Pat McGrath, which you can currently pick up. So basically this has a teal, a gold, a navy, and also a cool toned shimmer that has a little bit of purple in it. And so I first did one look that basically only used this palette, and it was fine, but I didn't actually like the finishes of the look. I felt like the Lisa Eldridge just had a little bit more sparkle, a little bit more dimension. And so I ended up doing another look, and I'll put up some pictures here of that look, which I really liked. So basically what I did for that look was I actually first started with the new Natasha Denona Retro Glam palette, and I took some of this sage shade and used that as a transition shade just to sort of start the look. And then I went in with that teal shade from the Pat McGrath palette to really build out the crease area. And then I went in with this electric blue shade from the Circo Loco palette from Natasha Denona. And I used this shade Grin as the gold shade. And then for the inner corner, I used Aerialist. And I actually found that I really liked that look. I keep looking back at pictures from that day because it is just such a gorgeous and unique look that's very colorful, but still really coheres together because all of the shades are still next to each other on the color wheel. And so I actually really enjoyed that look and kind of feel like I probably should have picked up that palette instead of this Myth palette. But this Myth palette is probably better for more of an everyday friendly look. I mean, the look I did today, which used all of the shades, is not, that in your face. It's still relatively subtle. But in the event you haven't picked up anything from this launch yet and you're on the fence on these two palettes, I would say that if you have similar taste to me, you might prefer the Sorcery palette. So now let's get into my overall thoughts and impressions about this release. So on the whole, I will say I'm quite pleased with this launch from Lisa Eldridge. The packaging for these eyeshadow palettes is absolutely gorgeous, and the formulas are all very high quality. You can tell that this is a very thoughtful curation from Lisa Eldridge, and the fact that for her first eyeshadows, they're basically as good as Natasha Denona's, which is one of the best quality formulas on the market, is really impressive. That said, when it comes to evaluating this palette in particular, Myth, I would say that I'm not necessarily as much of a fan of it as I thought I would be. So for one, it's very matte heavy for my preferences, and even though I do like this matte formula, I do think I prefer a bit more of a powdery matte formula that has a little bit more pigmentation to it. For me, the Pat McGrath matte formula is still my favorite, and when it comes to Natasha Denona, I do like her cream to powder formula, but it's not necessarily my favorite formula from her either. And so that is one thing I'll note with this palette. It is 4 of those sorts of cream to powder formulas. Also, I think realistically most days I wouldn't use all 4 of these mattes. Even though they are definitely all distinct from each other, it's not like they give you very different looks. And so I think most days I would probably just use this and then one of these 2 and then maybe a little bit of the deepest shade. And that brings me to what I think is the biggest limitation of this palette, which is that it only has 1 of these metallic shades. And so for someone like me who likes having a shimmer all over the lids, that means that all of the looks with this palette are going to look very similar to each other, because basically the only thing I can switch up is which mattes I use in my crease and whether I use this glitter topper. So for me, I would have really preferred having at least 1 more metallic formula just to be able to switch it up, especially because this matte is just quite deep. And so if you're thinking about this palette for more of an everyday basis, it might be a little bit too smoky depending on your preferences. And then finally, for this glitter topper shade, I must admit I'm a little bit disappointed. I mean, it's not a bad formula, it's really just about the effect that you're trying to achieve. So this truly just gives you a very light sprinkling of fine shimmer particles on your lid. So if you're someone who wants something that's kind of like fairy dust on your lids, if you look really close up, then I think you'll really like this formula. But if you're someone like me who likes a little bit more impact and doesn't like to have to keep packing on the topper in order to get that effect, then this is probably not the best formula for you, because I feel like I've already had to really dig my finger a lot into this shade, and I'm a little bit worried that over time it'll get hard panned with that kind of motion. So overall, I think the effect it leaves on the lids is quite pretty, quite ethereal, but is just not as easy to use and as high impact as I would personally prefer. So on the whole, I like this palette, but if I could have done things over again, I probably would have picked up Sorcery. And in the future, this is not necessarily a formula that I'm gonna definitely run out and buy every time there are new versions, but if the right color story with the right finishes comes out, then I might pick up another one of these. I would love to hear in the comments below, though, what you guys think about this launch. Are you picking up any of these palettes? If so, which colorway are you most interested in? I would love to hear about your thoughts down below. So that's it for today's video. If you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!